Coming to you live from the nation's capital, it's Capitol Hill. I'm your host, Adam Preston, joined for tonight's Roundtable by conservative commentator Alan Freedom. It's good to see you again, Alan.
Thanks for having me back.
And representing the progressive point of view, we have Mark Ramber. Mark, it's good to have you on the program.
Good to be here, Adam.
And my first question tonight goes probably to each of you. Currently, both parties in the House are meeting behind closed doors to elect new leadership. What are your expectations, and are your sources giving any indication on who may be chosen? Mark, let's turn to you first.
Yeah, so I've been looking into this. It's been very exciting with all the newcomers coming into the House. The ones I'm really interested in are Calvin Ward. So this is a Democrat from Arkansas that just got elected. He's the son of a Presbyterian minister and a school teacher. He studied pre-law at Arkansas. You know, he's a fairly progressive guy from what I've heard because he's a newcomer on the Hill. So it'd be pretty interesting for him to be Speaker, which is what my sources have been telling me the Democratic Party's been considering. So I think that's a pretty interesting one. I was wondering what Alan had to think about that.
That's pretty good on the Democratic side. I was going to talk more about the Republican side.
Oh, yeah. We've got a couple other interesting newcomers that are making waves on Capitol Hill for the Democrats. One that I was also looking at was Dylan McMillan. He's from New York, I think. Yeah, he's a New Yorker, so that's pretty typical. But they're thinking of him, a newcomer, as majority leader. So I think that we'll probably see a lot of newcomers making waves. Because also, I don't know if you guys have heard of Naomi Brightwell. She just won a seat in California, and I've heard whispers of her becoming the new DNC chair. So I just think a whole lot of newcomers are going to take a lot of interesting, powerful positions in the Democratic Party, and I think that they'll probably change it pretty fundamentally. So it'll be an exciting next couple months and years.
Mark, it seems an interesting matchup to have the speaker from Arkansas and the majority leader possibly from New York. Do you see, which wing of the party do you see, having more power?
What, you mean between the Southerners and the Northerners?
I'm assuming that Ward will be a little bit more moderate than McMillan.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people have been thinking just by the fact that he's from Arkansas. But judging by sort of his character after speaking to him and the way that he ran his race, I'm actually probably not going to be surprised if he ends up being more progressive than some of the other Dylan McMillan and Brightwell will be very progressive, California Democrat, But I don't think that McMillan will probably end up being as progressive as a lot of people expect him to be, being from New York. But we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, interesting. Alan, turning over to you, do you expect the Republican leadership to be, firmly behind President Trump, or do you see a more maverick leadership shaping up?
Well, it kind of depends. It depends on whether Congressman Fitzgerald ends up retiring or not. There's some speculation that he might. Otherwise, I think the party would be firmly behind him, and he's definitely the pro-Trump candidate for that. But if not, you could see an outsider, maybe someone like Paul Vang. He's an up-and-comer. He's kind of new, but he's very articulate and very charismatic. We might see a shakeup in that.
Mark, who do you think the best matchup would be for the Democrats? Who would be would they prefer someone more traditional or to shake it up maybe?
Well, this has been an ongoing sort of struggle in the Democratic Party. You've seen a lot of up-and-comers that are really progressive coming in and sort of taking this position that the best way to beat President Trump is to pivot to the left and excite the base. But then you've seen other more traditional centrist Democrats saying that the best way to beat him is to try and win over moderate Republicans that might be sort of disenchanted with President Trump. And I think that's going to be the big story of the next 2 years going into this up-and-coming presidential election. of which direction the party takes, and I'm really interested in seeing what they decide there.
Me too. One of the more interesting issues that we're going to have coming up is the upcoming budget battle. So, Mark, do you think that this Democratic-controlled House is going to be able to reach compromise with Trump, or are we inevitably headed towards a government shutdown?
So this has been sort of a question as soon as the Democrats took the House, and even before then, because we saw the government shut down a couple of years ago over immigration. Is what how hard of a line are the Democrats going to toe against President Trump, particularly in these budget battles? I anticipate, especially with a lot of newcomers that tend to be more firebrand-ish than the traditional outgoing Democrats, I expect there to be a lot more ferociousness in their battles with Trump. So I would not at all be surprised if over an issue like building the wall, if Trump digs his heels in about that, I could see a government shutdown happening.
Alan, do you see President Trump digging his heels in?
Oh, definitely, especially on issues that were key issues in his campaign. Issues like building the wall and more security on our border. I think that's something that will be a must-have for him to feel confident signing that budget into law. Otherwise, he might threaten the veto.
If the government does shut down, if they're not able to pass a budget, who do you think, I guess this is going to both of you, who do you think is the net winner of that situation, or is it basically a pox on both their houses?
So
Alan, let's go back to you.
The Democrats, when the Democrats didn't hold any of the houses, when they only had a minority in the Senate and the government shut down, I was of the opinion that was worse for the Republicans since they held all the power. But now that the Democrats hold the House, I think it's a little bit of a different ball game. I would go more with pox on both their houses in that situation.
Do you agree with that, Mark?
I guess it would depend on how exactly it's done. If it's over something that's a key sort of issue for Republicans and for a lot of voters in the nation, they might be able to shift the blame more on Democrats for failing to compromise on that and simply doing it out of spite. But it depends on how exactly it plays out, how exactly it fails, whether it fails because of the House, whether it fails because of a veto. That'll kind of change how exactly people will place the blame. So, Alan, I'm interested in your opinion on this. Let's say that what I see the most likely situation coming up in which there's this government shutdown is over immigration. Like, let's say that like I said earlier, that Trump digs his heels in and says that the Republicans and the Democrats have to build the wall in order to fund the government, and the Democrats refuse. Who do you think wins in that situation? I think Trump wins in that situation, because then it's the Democrats being the no as opposed to Trump being the no. And he can say, look, folks, I tried to compromise, but they just didn't want to compromise at all, and they didn't want to do anything. Quite frankly, they just don't really want this wall. Well, but I think most of the polling has shown that the wall is unpopular with the American people. So wouldn't you, if the people are with the Democrats, then wouldn't that make them the winner? Well, I'd ask where exactly you got the statistics for the popularity of the wall. I actually think it is very popular. That's why he got such good results when he made one of his main points: "I will build the wall." Okay, that's interesting. We'll just have to wait and see, I guess.
Agreed. So actually, on the subject of immigration, I had a question that I wanted to ask you, Alan. Recently, we saw President Trump's promise to send troops to the southern border to stop this migrant convoy that's working its way through Central America. Do you think this is was just a strategy for the midterms, or do you think we're actually going to see a confrontation on the border?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. Part of it is a little bit of grandstanding for the midterms and showing the muscles and flexing a little bit. Part of it will depend on each state because the governor is still sovereign in the state, and if it's not a state run by a Republican governor, that could cause some friction between the Trump administration and that state. I do think that they will actually do something. It's not just all for show, although I will admit it probably is a little bit for show, more than a little bit. But I think that generally is a good thing to put more troops on the border, patrolling, putting up fences. The Border Patrol is massively underfunded and understaffed, and that's been a real problem.
It certainly does raise the stakes for these upcoming regional governor elections, for sure. Mark, do you have any, comment on if he's actually going to go through with it, if the president is, or what's going to happen here?
Oh, well, I mean, it's all speculation. But since we're speculating, I would not be surprised if we never heard about this caravan again. I mean, it's a couple thousand poor people, a lot of children, and a lot of like women and parents just trying to flee violence, and they're like hundreds of miles away. And we had another caravan like this a couple of years ago, and only a few hundred people actually made it to the border, and then they all just went to the ports of entry and applied for asylum. So I don't really think that this is going to be an issue going forward. I think it was all just to stir up the base for the midterms.
So you're not buying the White House's comments that there's terrorists and all that mixed in?
I mean, no, because there's no evidence of it. I mean, and I think that the fact that there's no evidence tells a big story, because if there were, I can guarantee you that the administration would have put that out there to stir up the base even more, that there are, you said, there are Middle Easterners. I mean, it was all just to stir up the base, and I think that he was pretty transparent about that. And now that the midterms are over, I don't think it's going to be even a little bit of an issue anymore.
Alan, any final comments on that?
I'm surprised that the liberal Mark Rambert just associated terrorism with Middle Easterners.
Whoa. No, I said that's what Trump said. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's what Trump said. That's word for word. He said, there are Middle Easterners in there just to scare his base. That's not me.
Okay.
For listeners.
It wouldn't be a roundtable without a little gotcha moment, right?
Any other thoughts, Alan?
I will admit it probably won't be as big of a caravan by the time it does arrive. It might only be 100 or a couple hundred people, and some will get asylum and some will just be turned away, and that'll be about it. But I will say there is fundamentally a problem with security on our southern border. It might not be the people in this caravan, and I have no information about the individuals in the caravan and their motivations or their background. But just from a general standpoint, there is a problem with security on our border. It's fairly easy to walk into parts of it or get through the fence. Some of this fence was built in the 80s and hasn't really been kept up. And there are parts of even some of the new fences where they had to patch up giant holes where people were cutting through. So there really is a problem. And I don't think that we should stand for a border being less secure than what I have to go through at the airport just to catch a regional flight.
Or do you think that there's any...
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, I guarantee you that this is going to be one of, if not the defining issue of the next 2 years. I mean, we all know that Trump loves to run on immigration, and I think that the people on both sides want immigration to be addressed. So I guarantee this is going to be one of the biggest issues going into this next congressional session.
Do you think there's any appetite at all for Democrats in Congress to, maybe reach a compromise on this, or is it simply going to be, dig your trenches?
Oh, I think there are definitely things that Democrats also want out of immigration that a compromise could serve them for. I'm thinking of DACA in particular and solidifying the DACA into law. And I think that it was early in, was it 2017 where then Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said that they'd be willing to make a deal where if they funded DACA, they'd build the wall, and then Trump refused and they took it off the table. Like there are compromises that I think would work for both sides, and I think that that's if the Democrats and Republicans are going to be successful at governing, those are the kind of deals that they're going to need to strike.
Well, I don't know if I'd really call compromise trading DACA for building the wall a compromise. That's giving up. I would say that's giving up everything for piecemeal. DACA is huge.
I'm not endorsing that particular deal.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just saying stuff like that. Working together to try and reach deals that serve both sides. But there are hardliners in both sides of the party, so I think it's going to be a hard road to compromise if they make it.
It'll certainly be interesting to see how it shakes out over the next couple of years. Well, Mr. Mark Ramber, Alan Freedom, thank you again for coming on. That does it for us here tonight on Capitol Hill. Capitol Hill is a free government simulation. Come play our game at TedderVision.com/Capitol Hill. I'm Adam Preston saying good night. We'll see you next time.